So, I know the title of this video is The Non-Aggression Principle and Why Libertarians Won't Address War, but we have to build up to that. So, let us begin with where my issues with the Libertarians begin, and what prompted me to make this video. So, a week ago I was watching Mentis Wave's video on why taxation is theft, and I must say it is the most cringe video he's ever made, as far as I can tell, and I've been watching him for about half a year. He just does not address the main issue, that saying you have to pay taxes because you live in a society is not a circular argument. It is in fact a demand that your ideology conform to reality. A libertarian dreaming about a utopia without taxes is no different than a communist dreaming about a utopia without classes. That's just not how the world works. We live in a world with taxes and classes. Now, how do we organize them better for everyone's benefit? Be practical. That is what prompted me to make this video. But the main issue why I'm not a libertarian and never will be is because, yes, they're not practical about paying taxes, but why is that? Well, the answer is simple. Mentis Wave also correctly recognizes that you can't leave society and go somewhere else because there are taxes everywhere, because every piece of land on the planet outside of Antarctica is claimed and administered by a sovereign state. And the reason for this is, of course, very simple. Because a sovereign state, at core, has evolved to collect taxes, raise armies, and defend borders. When land control is a zero-sum game, and when a country runs out of land, it ceases to exist. The sovereign states have to quite psychotically defend their borders at any cost, or they will cease to exist. And thus they have evolved to be effective at raising armies and defending borders. And the best way to do this is by collecting taxes. Professional militaries are much more effective than feudal levies that have to supply their own equipment. And yes, indeed, there is no such thing as a one-man army. If you as an individual were to claim, let's say, 200 hectares of land, and say, I live here and don't pay any taxes to anyone, well, the sovereign state is going to say, no, you are in my recognized borders that no other sovereign state claims, now pay your taxes. Why does the sovereign state do that? Simple. Efficiency. The sovereign state must collect taxes from everyone in its borders so that it would have the largest amount of tax money, so that it could field the best army and defend itself. If there are two neighboring countries with similar land worth and similar populations, the one that allows people to not pay taxes if they live in the middle of nowhere is going to lose in war to the one which demands taxes from everyone or else. And thus the sovereign state must demand taxes from your homestead, because it needs that money. And you cannot resist, because there is no such thing as a one-man army. In fact, there's no such thing as a one-man society. You cannot build roads alone, you cannot build electric grids alone, you cannot defend your property or yourself alone. If the army shows up and says that we are taking this plot of land, there is absolutely nothing you can do. And if you say you have guns, well then maybe you're taking down a soldier or two with you, but you are going down. And if the military doesn't need to take your house intact, they can just blow it up with artillery or cruise missiles. Because odds are, you are not rich enough to have anti-air defenses and counter-battery radar-directed artillery. There is no such thing as a one-man army. And that is the core of the issue. Libertarians refuse to address war. Like, in principle. They just say, no aggression, and then we build our ideology. That's not how the world works. I have, over the months, on numerous occasions, told the libertarians to address my question. What do you do when a modern British East India Company shows up and tries to colonize your society with a very weak central government because it doesn't get any tax money? Because paying taxes is purely voluntary. Like, I am very social, I will pay taxes voluntary. But if there are a bunch of freeloaders who don't pay taxes because, well, the government isn't perfect, so a little bit of it is lost to corruption, therefore I'm not going to pay taxes. Well, how is your weak central government going to raise an army to defend your country from a colonial company? Because, you know, nothing is more profitable than a monopoly enforced by force. Nothing is more profitable than collecting taxes. Make sovereign states weak, and private companies will replace them. You don't like your government? Would you prefer that Tencent was your government? You have to rally around the flag and defend your country from all invaders. And I think this is why libertarianism is so popular in America by comparison to where I live. In Latvia, I've met just one dude who considers himself a libertarian. Because everybody else understands that the greatest threat is foreign invasion. You know, we live like 400 kilometers from a hostile sovereign state, which obviously has an army with which it could invade if we had no army to put against it. Whereas Mentis Wave, who lives in Oregon, everywhere around him he only sees his own polity or allied sovereign states. Like, nobody has an army with which to invade his home city. He lives in the Portland area. So he thinks that his own government is the enemy. When in reality, no. Your own government is the organization of your own people for your own protection. You will see that the technology of the sovereign state spread at the same time as threat of invasion spread. Small raids can be dealt by small locals. Like, if a neighboring tribe sends 50 men on a raid, then your local village can't fend them off. But if a sovereign state sends an army of tens of thousands to invade, there is nothing your little village can do. And so, your neighboring villages unite into a single country that can also muster an army in the thousands to defend themselves. This is how the sovereign states spread, either by conquering those who would not unite, or by other people uniting after the model of their enemy. For example, in, the very country to Latvia's south, Lietuva. Well, the Confederation of Lietuviešu lands was formed as a direct response to the invasion of the German Crusaders. The tribes alone fractured into tens of clans, each of which with their own chiefs. They just could not put up an effective resistance against the Crusaders. So they agreed to elect a king and form a confederation of all the tribes and clans to resist. And this happens everywhere in history. When the Neo-Assyrian Empire ventured north into the mountains of around modern Armenia in search of metal with which to forge tools and weapons for its own defense. Well, the local tribes could not stand up to the Assyrian military, which went on campaign every year and was massive, so they united into a new country to defend their territory. And if you fail to do that, then you get conquered. For example, in Japan, the Yamato state spread eastward and conquered all the Ainu-related peoples of the main island, because they failed to unite in defense. So the sovereign state spread to northeastern Japan by way of conquest, because only a sovereign state can fight another sovereign state. And therein lies the crux of the issue when it comes to taxation as theft, on what prompted me to address this video. Taxes are voluntary. Your ancestors opted into a society where they pay taxes, and in exchange they get all sorts of privileges. For the duty of paying taxes and answering a draft, if it is called upon, you get the privilege of having public infrastructure and a military which defends you from foreign invaders. Even in America, you can see that back when there were places without government, people very much recognized that they wanted government. You know that panhandle at the western side of Oklahoma? Yeah, that panhandle used to be an unorganized territory which was detached from Kansas. I think it was Kansas. And then it had no government, which resulted in it being overrun by bandits and outlaws, so that the local people themselves organized a government to deal with this issue. And they rejoiced when their unorganized territory was added to the organized territory of Oklahoma. Because having a government is necessary for your protection. We don't live in a world where aggression doesn't exist. Violence as a way to get your way is universal throughout human history. You have to address war, or you're just dreaming about a utopia which will never exist. If you're going to make an ideology, it must outline how it is going to fight for what it believes in. So yes, libertarians are no different than communists in how unrealistic their ideology is. They might understand how the economy works quite well, but they are clueless about how society and interstate politics work. They also, for some bizarre reason, think that corporations are not corrupt. Well, the government is, when in reality the rules for rulers of a CEO or prime minister are exactly the same. Raise treasure for the keys of power so that they would obey your orders and keep you in power. But that's a discussion for another time. So, yeah. Don't be a libertarian, it's silly. There is no non-aggression principle because your enemies do not share your principles. Being a pacifist is weakness. Suffice to say, debate how we should better raise and spend taxes. Don't dream about a world without taxes. That will never exist. Death and taxes are the two certainties in life.